Hello, and welcome back to Horror Stories Audio. For our returning listeners, thank you for once again stepping into the shadows with us. Tonight, we explore a fear that is far more intimate than a monster in the closet or a ghost in the attic. We're going to talk about friendship and the horrifying betrayal of perception. Think about the person you know best in the world, a friend. You know the sound of their voice, the rhythm of their walk, the private jokes and shared histories that only you two understand. This knowledge forms a bond of absolute trust. But what happens when your own senses begin to lie to you? What if the friend who walked into the woods is not the same one who came back? What if they look the same and they sound the same, but a small, cold part of your brain screams that you are looking at an imposter, an imitation, something else entirely, wearing your friend's face like a mask? This is a slow burn camping horror story about that very paranoia. It's a question of who you trust when you can no longer trust what you see. Settle in and prepare yourself for a trip into the woods you won't soon forget. And as always, if you enjoy the cold embrace of fear, consider liking this story and subscribing to the channel. It helps our community of shadows grow. The story opens with the four friends Maya, Ben, Liam, and Chloe arriving at the remote, isolated campsite after a long drive. A drive that had taken them from the familiar veins of the highway to the thin, cracked capillaries of forgotten county roads. Liam was driving Ben's beat-up Forester, his knuckles white on the steering wheel as he navigated a final, rutted dirt track. "Are you sure this is a road, Ben?" he asked, his voice tight with the pragmatic skepticism that defined him. "My GPS gave up and died 10 miles ago. For all we know, we're driving to the bottom of a ravine." From the passenger seat, Chloe pressed her face against the window, her expression one of pure delight. "Oh, come on, Liam. This is an adventure. Look at those trees. It's beautiful." In the back, Maya was laughing. She and Ben had been on countless trips like this since they were kids, and Liam's predictable city dweller anxiety was a familiar refrain. Ben nudged her with his elbow. "Don't worry, Liam," he called out, his voice warm and reassuring. "I trust my dad's old paper map more than your satellite. It's just over this next rise." Maya looked at Ben, a comfortable, easy silence settling between them. Theirs was a close, sibling-like bond, forged over 2 decades of shared experiences, from scraped knees in kindergarten to navigating the awkwardness of high school dances. She caught his eye, and with a completely straight face, whispered, "Just be careful of the squirrels." Ben snorted, a laugh he tried and failed to suppress. Liam glanced in the rearview mirror, his brow furrowed. What's with you two and squirrels? It was a stupid, pointless piece of their shared history. On a childhood camping trip, a particularly aggressive squirrel had stolen an entire hot dog bun from a 7-year-old Ben's hand, an event he had declared the Great Squirrel Heist of '08. It was their go-to inside joke, a shorthand for any situation that was absurdly, comically frustrating. Ben just shook his head, still smiling. "Long story, man. You had to be there." The exchange was seamless, effortless, another small thread in the vast, intricate tapestry of their friendship. Just as Ben had promised, the track opened into a clearing. The remote, isolated campsite was perfect. It was a small, grassy meadow bordered on one side by a clear, fast-moving creek, and on the other 3, by a dense wall of ancient, towering pine trees. The air was clean and cool, smelling of damp earth and pine sap. For a moment, the 4 of them just stood there, taking in the profound silence, broken only by the sound of the water and the wind whispering through the high branches. The mood was instantly cheerful and lighthearted. "Okay, this was worth it," Liam admitted, a rare smile breaking through his skepticism. They set to work with the practiced energy of seasoned campers. Liam, ever the project manager, started barking out orders for firewood and tent placement. Chloe, humming to herself, began to unpack the food. Maya and Ben grabbed their shared tent. They moved together in a familiar, unspoken rhythm, unfolding the nylon, slotting the poles, and driving the stakes without needing to say a word. This too was a part of their shared history. 100 summer nights spent under the stars in a tent just like this one. As the sun began to dip below the tree line, casting long golden rays across the meadow, the camp was set. 2 tents stood ready. A neat pile of firewood sat beside a stone-ringed fire pit, and the cooler was open by the creek. The mood was buoyant, full of the easy laughter and uncomplicated joy of old friends at the start of a perfect weekend getaway. They were in the middle of nowhere, completely cut off from the world. And in that moment, it felt like absolute paradise. The first night fell like a soft, dark curtain, bringing a distinct chill to the air. The 4 friends gathered around the campfire they had built, the crackling flames pushing back the immense, inky blackness of the surrounding forest. Above, the sky was a spray of brilliant, cold stars, unobscured by any city lights. The mood was cozy and safe. The fire, a tiny island of warmth and humanity in the vast, silent wilderness. To pass the time, the friends started telling stories. Predictably, Liam went first, telling a rational, historical story about the area that he had researched before the trip. This entire valley, he began, his tone like a tour guide, was a major logging operation in the late 1800s. They clear-cut thousands of acres, but the camp was notoriously difficult to maintain. The winters were brutal, and the loggers complained of a strange melancholy that settled over the area, leading to high turnover. It was abandoned by 1905. He spoke of historical figures and economic hardships, his story grounded in facts and figures. Ben and Maya exchanged an amused look. Liam could turn any campfire into a history lecture. When he finished, Chloe, who had been nervously poking the fire with a stick, spoke up. "I read a different kind of story online," she said, her voice a little hesitant. Liam immediately scoffed. "Oh no, not one of your weird internet ghost stories." "It's not a ghost story exactly," Chloe insisted, pulling her blanket tighter around her shoulders. "It's a piece of local folklore. From a forum I found. They call it the Echoes of the Woods. The legend says that these specific woods, they're old, and sometimes they get lonely." She paused, making sure she had their attention. "The story goes that if someone wanders too far off the path, alone, the forest notices them, and sometimes it tries to make a copy. An echo." She lowered her voice, the firelight dancing in her wide eyes. "The person who comes back, the echo, looks and sounds exactly like the original, but it's just a perfect imitation. The people in the stories, the ones who came back, were described as being different or just empty. They had no real memories, just facts. They didn't understand jokes. They had no soul. The legend says the echo is just the forest, trying to understand what it's like to be a person, but it can never get it right. And the real person is never seen again. They just become part of the quiet." A heavy silence hung over the group when she finished. Then, Liam broke it with a loud, forced laugh. "That is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. A copy? That's just a story to scare tourists so they don't get lost. It's completely absurd." The story was immediately dismissed as a silly ghost story. Ben, sensing the mood had grown a little too tense, grinned and nudged Maya. "Well, I guess I'd better not wander off alone then. An echo of me would probably be way more responsible and boring." Everyone laughed, and the tension broke. They moved on to roasting marshmallows and talking about other things. But as Maya stared into the fire, Chloe's words lingered. The image of a perfect copy, an empty shell that looked just like someone she loved, planted a tiny, cold seed of foreshadowing in her mind. The next morning broke crisp and clear, the air sharp with the scent of pine. The horrors of Chloe's campfire tale felt distant and silly in the bright, cheerful sunlight. Maya watched Ben as he expertly coaxed their small camp stove to life, his movements familiar and comforting. The mood was light, full of the easy potential of a full day of adventure ahead. As they ate a quick breakfast of oatmeal and coffee, the discussion turned to the day's hiking plans. Predictably, a minor, friendly disagreement began to brew. Liam, ever the planner, had the worn paper map spread out on the cooler. "Okay, so if we pack up now and get an early start, we can take this trail north," he said, tracing a path with his finger. "It's a steep climb, but it leads to a fire tower on this ridge. The view is supposed to be panoramic." Ben, leaning back against a log with his coffee mug, shook his head with a slow grin. "A 5-hour forced march to see some trees we're already surrounded by? Come on, Liam. I was thinking we just follow the creek downstream, no trail, no destination. Just see where it takes us." "The point isn't the trees, it's the summit," Liam countered, his tone patient but firm. "It's about the accomplishment." "The point is to relax," Ben retorted, his smile still in place. "It's about not having a schedule. We do that every other day of the year." The debate continued for a few minutes, a familiar dance between Liam's love of structure and Ben's desire for spontaneity. It was a friendly disagreement, the kind they'd had 100 times before. Finally, Ben stood up, stretching his arms over his head. "All right, you two battle it out," he said, his voice light. "I'm going to go for a short walk alone to clear my head. And when I get back, the winning plan will be decided." He winked at Maya. "I'll be back in 20 minutes. Tops." Maya smiled back, completely unconcerned. This was classic Ben. When a conversation got stuck in a loop, he'd just step away for a moment. She watched as he walked towards the edge of the meadow. The dense, quiet woods that bordered their camp stood like a solid, silent wall of green and shadow. He reached the tree line, then turned back, and gave a final, casual wave to the group. Maya lifted her hand in return. Then, he turned back to the forest, took 2 more steps, and the woods simply swallowed him. He walked into the dense woods and was gone, disappearing from sight as if he had stepped through a curtain. The moment was utterly mundane, completely unremarkable. Maya turned back to the map, ready to argue in favor of Ben's lazy creek walk plan, fully expecting to see him walking back into the clearing any second. The first 20 minutes after Ben left passed easily. The minor, friendly disagreement about the day's hiking plans continued, with Liam advocating for a structured climb and Maya playfully defending Ben's desire to wander. The mood was still light, the conversation punctuated by laughter. Chloe was repacking her day pack, and the cheerful, mundane sounds of their activity filled the clearing. Maya glanced at the tree line, expecting to see Ben's familiar figure emerge at any moment. But then 20 minutes became 30. The conversation lulled. Chloe was the first to voice the thought that was beginning to form in all their minds. "He's been gone for a while, right?" she asked, her voice tinged with a slight note of concern. Liam, ever the timekeeper, checked his watch. 35 minutes, he announced, his tone factual but underlined with impatience. He said 20. The atmosphere in the camp began to shift. The cheerful ease was replaced by a quiet, simmering tension. Another 10 minutes crawled by. Now, no one was talking. All 3 of them were staring at the exact spot in the dense, quiet woods where Ben had disappeared. What had been a benign wall of green a short time ago now seemed like a silent, unmoving curtain, concealing something unknown. An hour passed, and the group began to worry in earnest. Liam stood up, his face set in a grim, determined expression. "Okay, this is ridiculous. We're not waiting any longer. Just as they were about to form a search party, with Liam barking out a plan to call out Ben's name before splitting up, a figure stepped out from the trees. It was Ben. He emerged from the woods, not from the spot he had entered, but about 30 yards to the left, and stood there for a moment, blinking in the bright sunlight. The tension in the camp broke in a wave of collective relief. "Ben, there you are!" Chloe cried out, her voice high with released anxiety. "We were about to send out a search party." Ben walked towards them, his pace unhurried. He seemed fine, physically unharmed, but there was a strange stillness about him. He looked slightly dazed and quieter than usual. He stopped just before the campfire ring and offered them a placid smile. "Sorry, guys," he apologized, his voice even and oddly devoid of emotion. "I just got a little turned around back there. The trees all look the same. I guess I lost track of time." "Lost track of time? You were gone for over an hour?" Liam said, his tone a mix of relief and annoyance. "We were seriously worried." Ben just continued to smile, a calm, pleasant expression that didn't quite reach his eyes. He brushed off their concerns with a casual shrug. "I'm fine, really. Just a bit turned around, no big deal." Liam and Chloe seemed to accept the explanation, their relief overriding any lingering questions. But Maya felt the first, tiny, unexplainable flicker of unease. She, who had known Ben her entire life, saw things they didn't. It was the way he was standing, a little too perfectly still, like a statue trying to imitate a person at rest. It was the quality of his gaze. He was looking at them, but not really seeing them. The familiar, mischievous light in his eyes was gone, replaced by a flat, observational calm. He looked like a perfect photograph of her best friend, a flawless imitation that was missing the vital, chaotic spark of life. She told herself she was being ridiculous, that her worry had simply put her on edge. But as Ben turned to sit down, the flicker of unease didn't go away. It settled deep in her gut, a small cold stone of a question she didn't know how to ask. That evening, the initial relief of Ben's return had solidified into a renewed sense of cheerful normalcy for everyone except Maya. As the campfire crackled and the sky deepened to a bruised purple, the small, strange things began. The first sign came with dinner. Ben was, to put it mildly, a notoriously bad cook. His culinary skills were a long-running joke within the group. He was a man who could burn water, whose signature dishes were either charred beyond recognition or dangerously undercooked. So, when he volunteered to cook the evening meal, Liam had laughed. "All right, who's ready for Ben's famous salmonella surprise?" But the person who cooked dinner that night was not the Ben they knew. He moved with an unfamiliar economy and grace around their makeshift kitchen. There was no fumbling, no second-guessing. He chopped vegetables with a steady, rhythmic precision. He seasoned the stew not with a clumsy shake, but with a confident, measured hand, even tasting it once with a critical, thoughtful expression Maya had never seen him wear. He prepared a meal with unusual skill, and the result was astonishing. The stew was perfectly balanced, rich, and delicious. "Ben, this is incredible," Chloe said, her eyes wide with genuine shock. "When did you learn to cook like this?" Ben just looked up from his bowl and offered that same placid smile from the afternoon. "I guess I've been practicing," he said, his voice flat. The real Ben would have been preening, taking a bow and milking the compliment for all it was worth. This Ben just ate his meal in a quiet, efficient silence. Later, as they sat around the fire, the easy, comfortable quiet of a full stomach settling over them, the second wrong thing happened. A pine cone from a branch overhead fell into the fire, causing a burst of bright popping sparks. It reminded Maya of their old inside joke. She turned to Ben, a wide grin on her face. "Watch out, Ben," she said, her voice playful. Looks like the Squirrel Syndicate is back for revenge. It was a perfect setup, a line she had used a dozen times. The real Ben would have instantly understood, launching into a mock panicked rant about the Great Squirrel Heist of '08. He would have laughed, his eyes crinkling at the corners. But this Ben just gave her a blank, polite smile. There was no spark of recognition in his eyes. No shared history. It was the smile you would give a stranger who had told a joke you didn't quite get. The moment hung in the air, suddenly and terribly awkward. Maya's own smile faltered. When she questioned him, her voice barely a whisper. "Ben? The squirrel heist? Don't you remember?" He just blinked at her slowly. He ran a hand over his face and sighed. "Sorry, Maya," he said, his voice sounding genuinely weary. "I'm just really tired. That walk took more out of me than I thought. My head's a little fuzzy." The excuse was perfect. It was logical, irrefutable. It made her feel like a jerk for even asking. Liam and Chloe accepted it without a second thought. But Maya was left questioning her own perception. Two things had happened that were fundamentally, characteristically wrong. But both had plausible explanations. Was she just being paranoid because of her earlier worry? Was she seeing patterns that weren't there? Or was the person sitting across the fire from her, wearing her best friend's face and smiling with his mouth, a complete and utter stranger? She didn't know. And that uncertainty was a new, colder kind of fear. The next day, a tense and fragile quiet hung over the camp. Maya had barely slept, her mind replaying the image of Ben's blank, polite smile over and over. She watched him now, as he moved about the campsite in the morning light, looking for any other sign of wrongness, any other crack in the facade. For Liam and Chloe, the strangeness of the previous evening had been forgotten, dismissed as Ben simply being tired. They decided to attempt a light hike, a compromise on the previous day's argument by following the creek downstream for a while. Maya agreed, seeing it as an opportunity to observe Ben in a more active setting. For the first hour, everything seemed almost normal. The sun was warm, the sound of the creek was a pleasant murmur, and the group's conversation was light. They hopped from stone to stone along the water's edge, laughing when someone almost lost their balance. Maya started to feel a sliver of hope. Maybe she had been wrong. Maybe she had overreacted. Her grief and the ranger's spooky story making her paranoid. Ben was walking a few feet ahead of her, his movements looking just like the movements she had known her whole life. It was as they were navigating a particularly slippery patch of moss-covered rocks that the accident happened. Chloe, trying to cross a narrow channel, placed her foot on a wet, slick stone. Her boot slipped, and with a sharp, terrified cry, she went down. Hard. Her ankle twisted under her at an unnatural angle, and a sound like a dry branch snapping echoed in the quiet air. She cried out again, this time a raw, sharp sound of pure pain, clutching her leg. Instantly, Maya and Liam rushed to help. Maya was at her side in a second, dropping to her knees on the wet rocks. "Chloe, oh my God, are you okay? Where does it hurt?" Liam was right behind her, his face a mask of concern, immediately switching into his pragmatic problem-solving mode. "Don't move it," he instructed, his voice steady despite the panic in his eyes. "Let me see. Can you put any weight on it?" Their reactions were immediate, instinctive, and deeply human. It was in that moment of chaos and concern that Maya looked up for Ben. The real Ben, the Ben she knew, would have been the first one there. He would have already been trying to make Chloe laugh through her tears with a stupid, terrible joke, his own face pale with worry. But the person wearing Ben's face was not there. He remained detached, standing a few feet back from the scene, near the tree line. He wasn't rushing forward. He was simply observing the scene. His head was tilted with a cold, clinical curiosity, his eyes moving from Chloe's pained face to Maya's. and Liam's frantic ones. He wasn't looking at his friend who was hurt. He was watching a biological organism respond to a stimulus. He was studying the human response to pain. The complete and utter lack of emotional response was more terrifying to Maya than any ghost story. It was a void, a chilling emptiness where a human soul should have been. After a long moment, he finally walked over, his expression calm. "The ankle appears to be inverted," he said, his voice as neutral as a doctor's. "We should stabilize it and get her back to camp." The advice was correct, but the delivery was monstrously wrong. As Maya and Liam worked together to help a sobbing Chloe to her feet, Maya couldn't shake the image of Ben's curious, empty eyes. The flicker of unease from the day before had now ignited into a sickening, terrifying certainty. That was not her friend. Later that afternoon, the camp was quiet. Chloe was resting in her tent, her sprained ankle propped up on a pile of sweatshirts. Liam was dutifully tending to the fire, his practical nature finding comfort in the simple, necessary task. Ben, the thing that looked like Ben, was sitting alone by the edge of the creek, skipping stones across the water with a placid, unnerving calm. The certainty Maya had felt during the accident had solidified into a cold, hard knot of terror in her stomach. She couldn't let it go. She needed answers. Maya decided to confront Ben in private. She walked over to him, her heart pounding. He didn't look up until she was standing right beside him. "Hey," he said, his voice as mild and friendly as ever. "Feeling better?" "No," Maya said, her own voice coming out sharper than she intended. "Ben, we need to talk. Something is wrong." He finally turned to look at her, his expression one of mild, patient curiosity. "Wrong? What's wrong?" Maya took a deep breath and let it all out, her words tumbling over each other in a desperate rush. "Last night, the joke, the squirrel heist. You looked at me like I was a stranger. You didn't remember it, Ben. And the cooking, you're a terrible cook, you always have been. And then with Chloe, you just stood there. The real you, the Ben I know, would have been there in a second. You would have been panicking right alongside me. But you just watched. It was cold." There was a coldness to it, Ben. "What is going on with you?" Throughout her frantic accusation, he didn't interrupt. He just listened, his head tilted slightly. When she was finished, breathless and shaking, he didn't get angry or defensive. Instead, Ben responded with perfect, calm rationality. "Okay," he said softly, his voice a soothing balm. "I hear you. You're right, I was out of it last night. I told you that walk took a lot out of me. I was exhausted. I'm sorry the joke didn't land." He then smiled a little. "And the cooking? I've been watching videos online trying to get better. I wanted it to be a nice surprise for you guys. I guess it was." He stood up and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. His touch felt strangely neutral, lacking the familiar warmth she knew. As for Chloe, he continued, his expression shifting to one of deep, sincere concern. "I saw you and Liam were already there. You had it completely under control. What good would a third person rushing in and panicking have done? I was trying to stay calm and assess the situation."
Bring it up close to you and...
"You know," he added gently, "sometimes you can be a little overprotective. You always have been, ever since we were kids." His words were like a series of expertly placed blows, each one perfectly designed to disarm her. He wasn't just defending himself, he was turning it all back on her. "Honestly, Maya," he said, his voice dropping to an intimate whisper, "I'm more worried about you than anything else. You seem so on edge this trip. You're not sleeping well, are you? I hear you tossing and turning." He looked deep into her eyes. "Maybe the stress of everything is finally getting to you. This was supposed to be a relaxing trip, and you've been wound so tight since we got here." He gaslighted her expertly. Every argument she had was met with a plausible, caring-sounding explanation. Every fear she raised was reframed as a symptom of her own instability. He made her feel like she was the one who was going crazy. The certainty she had felt just moments before dissolved into a sea of confusing self-doubt. Was he right? Was she just stressed? And paranoid? I'm sorry, she stammered, feeling foolish and cruel. Maybe you're right. I'm just worried. I know, he said, patting her shoulder. Don't worry. I'm fine. He turned back to the creek, leaving Maya standing there, her mind reeling. She was more alone than ever. No longer just fighting a terrifying suspicion about her friend, but a new, horrifying doubt about her own sanity. The rest of the day was a quiet, agonizing ordeal for Maya. She felt as though she were in a nightmare, watching her friends laugh and talk with a creature that was wearing Ben's face. The gaslighting had been brutally effective, leaving her adrift in a sea of self-doubt. But the cold, hard certainty that had formed when she saw Ben's reaction to Chloe's injury was a rock she couldn't dislodge. She knew, with a terrifying clarity, that she was not crazy. She was just alone. Late in the afternoon, she got her chance. Ben had wandered down to the creek again, claiming he wanted to try and spot the fish he'd seen earlier. Maya, now deeply distressed, seized the moment and tried to share her fears with Liam and Chloe as they sat by the fire pit. Guys, we have to talk about Ben, she began, her voice low and urgent, struggling to keep the tremor out of her words.
So you can leave
This
the
isn't
fly
just him
there.
being tired.
Basically
Something
just
is seriously
put
wrong.
the
Liam, who was
poles
sharpening a
together?
stick for roasting marshmallows later,
As tall as you.
didn't even look up.
Yeah.
Maya, are we really doing this again? Yes, we are, she insisted, her voice rising. He didn't know our joke. He cooked like a professional chef, and you saw him when Chloe fell. He just watched. There was nothing there, Liam. No emotion. Liam finally looked at her, and his expression was not one of concern, but of profound annoyance. As the group's skeptic, he completely dismissed her concerns. Okay, let's be rational, he said, his tone condescending. He learned a new recipe. He was tired and didn't get a joke. And when Chloe fell, he probably just froze for a second. That happens. You are taking completely normal things and twisting them into some big conspiracy. He threw the stick into the fire in frustration. Honestly, Ben told me he was worried about you, and I can see why. You're being paranoid, Maya. His words were a gut punch, confirming that Ben had already turned her friends against her. Desperate, Maya turned to Chloe, whose face was pale as she looked back and forth between them. Chloe, you saw him. You said he was acting weird. Chloe was torn. She hugged her knees to her chest, avoiding Liam's glare. I don't know, she stammered, her voice barely audible. He does seem a little different, quieter. She admitted Ben was acting a little weird, but she was too afraid of the implications to fully support Maya. The idea that something truly terrible had happened to Ben was a reality she was not prepared to face. But maybe he's just in a weird mood? Maybe we should just try to have a good time and not, push him. Her retreat was a clear signal. She was too scared to help. The conversation was over. Liam had made his judgment, and Chloe had chosen to hide. Maya was left standing there, her desperate plea having achieved nothing but cementing her own isolation. She looked from Liam's angry, disbelieving face to Chloe's fearful, averted gaze. In that moment, Maya was now psychologically isolated from the group. She was in a camp with 3 strangers, one who wore her best friend's face, one who thought she was crazy, and one who was too afraid to believe her. The entity hadn't just taken Ben. It had skillfully and cruelly taken her entire world away from her, leaving her utterly and completely alone. Maya, desperate for proof after the disastrous conversation, felt a new kind of resolve harden within her. The gaslighting and her friend's disbelief had pushed her past the point of simple fear. Now she needed something tangible, something irrefutable, not just for them, but for herself. She needed to know she wasn't losing her mind. Her opportunity came an hour later when Liam and Chloe decided to walk down to the creek to refill their water bottles. Ben went with them, and Maya, feigning a headache, stayed behind at the camp, her heart pounding with a mix of guilt and grim determination. The moment they were out of sight, she moved, her hands shaking. She began to search Ben's belongings. She felt like a traitor as she unzipped his backpack, the sound deafening in the quiet clearing. She rummaged through his neatly folded clothes, his wash kit, his books. Everything was normal, exactly as it should be. A wave of self-doubt washed over her. Maybe Liam was right. Maybe she was just being paranoid. Then, in a side pocket, she found his wallet. She opened it, her fingers tracing the worn leather. She knew this wallet as well as her own, and she knew what was supposed to be in the clear plastic sleeve on the left side. For as long as she could remember, that sleeve had held his beloved, worn-out photo of his childhood dog, Buster. The photo was creased and faded, the corners soft from years of being carried everywhere. It was, Ben had always joked, his good luck charm. But as Maya looked, a cold dread washed over her. The plastic sleeve was empty. The photo was missing. This was something the real Ben would never, ever remove. It was a violation. A tiny, silent scream from the past that this person was a fraud. Later that afternoon, the final, undeniable proof arrived in the most mundane way possible. The four of them were sitting around the cold campfire, a tense silence hanging between them. To break the awkwardness, Chloe pulled a box of assorted granola bars from her pack and offered them around. "Anyone want one?" Maya watched as Ben reached in and, without hesitation, took one of the oat and honey bars. Maya's blood ran cold. She knew that brand. She had packed the food herself. That specific bar was packed with chopped peanuts. It was a fact as ingrained in her mind as Ben's birthday. The real Ben was moderately allergic to peanuts. It wouldn't kill him, but it would, without fail, cause his throat to itch, his face to flush, and angry red hives to break out on his arms. She held her breath, watching him. Her internal monologue was a frantic prayer, hoping for the reaction that would prove she was wrong, that this was all a terrible misunderstanding. He tore open the wrapper and took a bite, chewing thoughtfully. Maya waited. Nothing. He took another bite, then another, eating the entire granola bar with a placid, casual enjoyment. There was no coughing, no scratching at his neck, no flushing of his skin. He had no reaction at all. In that moment, all of Maya's self-doubt, all of her fear of going crazy, evaporated and was replaced by a cold, diamond-hard certainty. You could forget a joke. You could learn a new skill. You could even lose a precious photograph. But you could not will away a biological allergy. The threat was now confirmed to her. The question was no longer if something was wrong with Ben. The question was, what was she going to do about the thing that was wearing his face? Now that she knew the truth, a terrifying cold clarity settled over Maya. The world snapped into a horrifying new focus. Her panic and self-doubt were gone, replaced by the grim, hyper-alert focus of a cornered animal. She had to pretend everything was normal. She had to smile. She had to talk. She had to act as if her best friend hadn't been replaced by a monster. Her survival, and maybe Chloe's and Liam's, depended on it. With this new, terrible knowledge, Maya began to watch Ben with new eyes. Before, she was looking for her friend. Now, she was studying an alien. That evening, around the campfire, the scene was a masterclass in psychological terror. Liam was telling a long, rambling story about a frustrating project at work, while Chloe listened sympathetically. Maya pretended to listen, but her entire focus was on the thing that looked like Ben. She observed him in conversation, and she noticed how he wasn't truly participating, but studying. His posture was unnervingly still, his eyes fixed on whoever was speaking with an intense, unblinking focus. He was a silent audience, a recording device capturing data. He'd nod at the right times. His smile would appear and disappear in perfect sync with the group's mood, but it was all a flawless, empty performance. She saw him subtly mimicking Liam's gestures. Liam, frustrated by his own story, ran a hand through his hair and sighed. "It was a total nightmare," he said. A few minutes later, when Chloe asked Ben if he was feeling better, he paused for a fraction of a second too long, as if searching a database for the correct response. Then, he performed the exact same gesture, the hand through the hair, the sigh. It was a perfect echo, but it was hollow. It was a gesture without the emotion behind it, a physical plagiarism that made Maya's skin crawl. Later, she saw him adopting Chloe's phrases. Chloe, describing a beautiful sunset she'd seen, said, "The colors were just insane." She said it with her typical breathless enthusiasm. Not 10 minutes later, Liam asked Ben what he thought of the stew from last night. Ben smiled his pleasant, empty smile. "It was insane," he said, his voice completely flat. The word, coming from him, was utterly wrong. It was a piece of borrowed vocabulary, a bit of camouflage he had just acquired and was now testing out. Maya felt a profound, soul-deep chill as she realized what she was witnessing. He was trying to piece together a personality from the people around him. He was a blank slate, a mirror, reflecting back whatever was put in front of him. He was taking Liam's gestures, Chloe's words, and presumably Maya's own reactions, and attempting to stitch them together into a believable human. The thing they were interacting with wasn't a person at all. It was a patchwork, a mosaic of them, a hollow shell filled with their own stolen mannerisms. She looked at the thing where Ben's face, laughing at one of Liam's jokes with a sound that was technically correct but emotionally vacant. In that moment, Maya understood. He was a predator, learning its camouflage. The friendly smiles, the mimicry, the quiet observation, it wasn't a flaw in the system. It was the system itself. It was a process of infiltration, of learning how to perfectly imitate the herd before it picked its next target. And she was the only one who could see the monster under the skin. The rest of the day passed in a state of surreal, silent warfare. Maya went through the motions of camp life, forcing herself to laugh at Liam's jokes and help Chloe with her ankle. But her awareness was entirely fixed on the thing that wore Ben's face. She was watching its every move, analyzing its every word. And a new, chilling realization began to dawn on her. It was watching her, too. There was a new quality to its gaze when it looked at her. The placid, observational calm was still there, but now it was tinged with something else. A focused, intelligent appraisal. Ben, realized Maya knew. The game had changed. The entity made its first subtle power play that evening. After dinner, Maya took the dirty plates and pots down to the creek to wash them, grateful for a moment away from the strained atmosphere of the campfire. She was kneeling by the water's edge, the cold stream numbing her hands, when a sudden sixth sense made the hair on her arms stand up. She looked up. He was standing on the bank just behind her, having approached without a single sound. When Maya was alone, he approached her, and while maintaining his friendly facade, he began to speak, his voice a low, gentle murmur that barely rose above the sound of the creek. "You've been quiet today, Maya," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. She didn't answer, her heart hammering against her ribs. He took a step closer. "You're different from the others," he continued, his smile still in place. "You see things they don't. You feel things more deeply." He paused, letting his words hang in the air. Then, he said something deeply unsettling, his voice dripping with a counterfeit sympathy. It must be so hard, feeling like you're the only one who sees things clearly. His words were a horrifying confirmation. He was acknowledging her reality, validating her sanity, and in doing so, confirming that he was exactly what she feared. He was telling her, without ever saying it, that she was right, and that she was alone in her knowledge. He took another step, his shadow falling over her. Liam is simple, the thing said, its voice still a soft, friendly whisper. He only believes what's in front of him. And Chloe. She's afraid of everything. She sees what she wants to see. They won't be a problem for you. The words were a clear, calculated dismissal of her only potential allies. It was a veiled threat. A promise of isolation. He was drawing a circle around the two of them, cutting her off from the rest of her world. He then knelt down beside her, his face close to hers. The friendly mask was still perfectly in place, but his eyes were ancient and cold as stones at the bottom of a river. "Don't worry," he said, the words a terrifying parody of reassurance. "I'll take care of you." The phrase, which should have been comforting, was laced with an unspoken menace. It was a promise, but it was not a promise of safety. It was a promise that she was now his sole focus. He stood up, patted her on the shoulder as if they had just shared a friendly chat, and walked back towards the campfire, leaving her kneeling by the water, trembling and cold. She now knew two things with absolute certainty. 1. The thing pretending to be her friend was intelligent, calculating, and aware of her. 2. She was in more danger than she could have ever imagined. That night, Maya lay rigid in her sleeping bag, her eyes wide open in the suffocating darkness of the tent. Sleep was an impossible luxury. The entity's veiled threat echoed in her mind, each word replaying with a cold, metallic clarity. "I'll take care of you." Every rustle of leaves outside, every hoot of a distant owl, was the sound of the monster. She was utterly, hopelessly alone, trapped in a nightmare with two friends who didn't believe her, and a creature that was now toying with her before it did, whatever it was it planned to do. She had been lying there for hours, a prisoner of her own terror, when she heard a new sound. It was the faint, hesitant zip of her own tent flap. She froze, her heart seizing in her chest. It was him. It had come for her. She squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the inevitable. But instead of a cold touch or a monstrous visage, a frantic, terrified whisper cut through the darkness. "Maya, are you awake?" It was Chloe. With a shaking hand, Maya fumbled for her headlamp, clicking it on. A terrified Chloe was crouched in the opening of the tent, her face pale and streaked with tears in the beam of light. She quickly scrambled inside, zipping the tent shut behind her with a clumsy, panicked motion. She was trembling from head to foot. "He knows," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Oh God, Maya, he knows you know. And he's learning." Chloe secretly came to Maya's tent, her story tumbling out in a torrent of terrified whispers. She told Maya that Ben had cornered her earlier in the evening when she went to the creek alone to rinse her ankle bandage. His friendly facade had dropped the moment they were out of earshot of the camp. He had started asking her questions. At first they were simple, but then they became intensely detailed. Strangely personal questions about Maya's childhood. He asked about that scar on your knee, the one you got when you fell out of the treehouse. Chloe whispered, her eyes wide with horror. He wanted to know exactly how old you were, what year it was. He asked about your grandmother's name, the one who passed away. He kept asking how to spell it, over and over. Chloe took a ragged breath. And then he asked about the Great Squirrel heist. He wanted me to explain it to him, detail by detail, like he was studying for a test. He was asking me questions the real Ben would already know the answers to. It wasn't a conversation, Maya. It was an interrogation. He was mining me for information about you, trying to fill in the gaps in his performance. A wave of dizzying, overwhelming relief washed over Maya, so powerful it almost made her sob. She wasn't crazy. It was real. Chloe's terror was her validation. Chloe grabbed her arm, her grip desperate. "I didn't get it before," she said, her voice breaking. "I was scared. I'm so sorry, Maya." "I believe you. I believe you completely. That thing is not Ben." The shared belief was a tiny spark in the immense darkness, but it was enough. Their fear crystallized into a single, desperate purpose. They formed a pact right there, huddled together in the small tent. They had to escape. Their whispers became frantic, strategic. The car keys were in Liam's jacket, which he always left in the vestibule of his tent. They would have to wait until just before dawn, when the cold was deepest and sleep was heaviest. They would create a distraction, get the keys, and run. It was a flimsy, desperate plan. But it was a plan. For the first time in 2 days, Maya was not alone in her nightmare. She had an ally in the dark. In the deep, cold blackness just before dawn, Maya and Chloe put their desperate plan into motion. Every sound was magnified 100 times: the crunch of a pine needle underfoot, the rasp of a zipper, the frantic pounding of Maya's own heart. With a shared, terrified look, they moved to Liam's tent. Maya gently shook him awake while Chloe prepared for her performance. "Liam, wake up," Maya whispered, her voice tight with a manufactured panic. "It's Chloe. Her ankle." Liam was awake in an instant, his mind already in a problem-solving mode. He emerged from his tent, a powerful flashlight cutting a beam through the darkness, and found Chloe sitting on a log, her face pale and contorted in pain. "It's so much worse," Chloe whimpered, her acting skills fueled by genuine terror. "It's throbbing. I can't feel my toes. I think something might be broken. We have to go." "We have to go to a hospital." Maya and Chloe tried to convince Liam to leave, their pleas urgent and insistent. For a moment, it seemed to be working. Liam knelt, his expression full of concern as he examined Chloe's swollen ankle in the flashlight beam. He was a good person, a good friend, and his first instinct was to help. Okay, let's not panic," he said, his voice calm and authoritative. "We'll get you packed up. We can be on the road in 30 minutes. But as Maya and Chloe began to rush, their movements a little too frantic, a little too eager, Liam's suspicion began to surface. He watched them for a moment, his brow furrowed. They weren't just packing Chloe's things. They were trying to break down the entire camp with a desperate, chaotic speed. His gaze sharpened, moving from Chloe's supposedly agonizing injury to Maya's terrified, determined face. Liam, however, confronted them about their secretive behavior. "Stop," he said, his voice suddenly hard. "Just stop. What is going on with you two?" "What are you talking about?" Maya said, her heart sinking. "Chloe's hurt. We need to go." "No," Liam shot back, standing up and crossing his arms. "This isn't about her ankle. I saw you two whispering all night. You're acting like cornered animals. This is about Ben, isn't it? This is still about your weird, paranoid fantasy that something is wrong with him." Before Maya or Chloe could even formulate a denial, he did the worst possible thing. He turned towards the other tent and called Ben over to mediate. "Ben, get out here. Maya and Chloe are trying to bail, and I think you need to hear this." A moment later, the zipper on the other tent slid open, and the thing wearing Ben's face emerged. He looked perfectly normal, his expression one of sleepy, good-natured confusion. "What's going on? Is Chloe okay?" Now all four friends were gathered by the fire. A tense, terrible tableau in the pre-dawn gloom. Maya and Chloe stood on one side, their escape plan in absolute ruins, their faces a mask of undisguised fear. Liam stood on the other, angry, confused, and demanding a rational explanation. And in the middle was the entity, looking from face to face with a calm, reasonable expression. The perfect, patient mediator. The tension was at a breaking point. Maya looked at the thing that had stolen her best friend's life, and she knew, with a sudden, chilling certainty, that the time for secrets and subtleties was over. The air by the fire was thick with accusation and fear. Liam stood with his arms crossed, his face a mask of angry disbelief, looking back and forth between Maya and a crying Chloe. The thing that looked like Ben stood between them, the very picture of a calm, concerned friend. "So what is it, Maya?" Liam demanded, his voice cutting through the pre-dawn chill. "Are you going to tell me what's actually going on? Or are you just going to keep acting crazy and trying to drag Chloe into it?" "You wouldn't believe me if I told you, Liam," Maya said, her voice trembling with a mixture of terror and frustration. The thing wearing Ben's face stepped forward, placing a placating hand on Liam's arm. "Liam, let's all just calm down," it said, its voice perfectly mimicking Ben's reasonable tone. "Maya's been under a lot of stress. We're all tired. Let's not make it worse." That was the final straw. The condescending, feigned concern. The perfect, manipulative performance. It was all too much. The argument, combined with her utter frustration at being trapped and disbelieved, caused something in Maya to snap. A memory surfaced, a foundational moment of shared terror from their childhood. They were 10 years old, at a family lake house. Ben had wandered off into the woods at dusk and gotten lost. Maya had found him hours later, cold and crying, huddled at the base of a tree. It was the first time she had ever felt true, paralyzing fear. A fear they had shared and sworn never to forget. In her moment of frustration, Maya yelled a specific, emotional phrase from that shared traumatic memory only she and the real Ben would know. "Just stop it," she screamed, her voice raw and breaking. She wasn't looking at Liam anymore. Her eyes were locked on the imposter. "Not again. It's the lake house all over again, isn't it?" For the first time since it had returned from the woods, the entity was caught off guard. Ben froze. It wasn't a human pause. It was a system crash. His mouth, which had been about to form another placating word, hung slightly open. His eyes, which had been expertly simulating concern, became unfocused. He tried to respond, but his mimicry failed. The phrase was a key to a lock he didn't have, a password to an emotional database he couldn't access. He couldn't access the raw emotion of that memory, because he didn't have it. Then, the mask slipped, in a horrifying, silent transformation. His face went blank. His smile vanished, not fading but retracting, as if it were a physical object being put away. Every trace of warmth, every micro-expression he had so perfectly copied, dissolved. His expression became utterly inhuman and empty. The face that remained was a neutral, biological canvas. The eyes as flat and lifeless as a doll's. In that moment, Liam finally saw it. He had been looking for his friend Ben to act strangely. He hadn't been looking for Ben to simply stop. The absolute alien emptiness that stared back at them was not the face of a person who was tired or stressed. It was the face of something that had never been human at all. The blood drained from Liam's face, his skepticism instantly incinerated by a pure, primal terror. He saw the thing that was pretending to be his friend. The argument was over. The three of them, Maya, Chloe, and now Liam, stood united in their horror, staring at the creature that was wearing their friend's skin. For a long, terrible moment, nobody moved. The four of them were frozen in a tableau of horror under the cold pre-dawn sky. Maya, Chloe, and Liam, united in their shared, silent terror, and the thing that wore Ben's face, standing before them, its expression a perfect, inhuman void. The silence was broken by a soft, almost curious tilt of the entity's head. With its cover blown, the entity dropped all pretense. It didn't transform into a monster with claws and fangs. The change was far more subtle and far more terrifying. The slack, empty expression on its face was replaced by one of cold, calm intent. Its relaxed posture straightened, becoming taut and predatory. It was no longer imitating a human at rest. It was a predator that had been spotted by its prey. It was Liam who broke the spell. His face, which had been pale with shock, contorted with a primal mixture of fear and rage. "Run!" he screamed, his voice tearing through the quiet. The single word shattered their paralysis. But as they turned to bolt for the car, the entity moved. It moved with an unnatural speed. A silent, fluid motion that defied logic. It didn't seem to run. It glided over the uneven ground. A blur of familiar denim and flannel. And in a fraction of a second, it had positioned itself directly between them and the truck, blocking their path to the car. It just stood there, waiting, its hands hanging loosely at its sides. The three friends made a frantic, desperate scramble for their lives, their previous plan replaced by a singular, animalistic need to escape. The cohesive group shattered into three individual points of panic. Maya stumbled over a log, her breath catching in a sob. Chloe screamed, a high, thin sound of pure terror. Liam, fueled by adrenaline, charged forward. "Get out of the way," he yelled, trying to shove past the thing that looked like Ben. The entity didn't even flinch. It simply raised an arm and caught Liam by the chest, its motion impossibly fast. Liam, who was bigger and stronger than Ben had ever been, was stopped dead, as if he had run into a stone wall. Maya watched in horror as the thing held Liam, its grip unnaturally strong, its face completely devoid of expression. There was no anger, no exertion, just a cold, mechanical application of force. This was the core of the nightmare, fighting past the thing that wears their friend's face. "The keys!" Maya screamed, the words clawing their way out of her throat. "Liam, the keys are in your jacket." That broke Liam's stupor. With a roar of effort, he twisted, shoving his hand into his pocket and pulling out the keys. He threw them desperately towards Maya. They skittered across the dirt, landing just a few feet from the entity. As Liam struggled against the creature's iron grip, Chloe did the only thing she could think of. She grabbed a heavy, half-burnt log from the fire pit and threw it with all her might at the thing's legs. It didn't seem to hurt it, but the impact was enough to make its grip on Liam falter for a split second. It was the only chance they would get. Liam broke free. Maya lunged for the keys. Her fingers closed around the cold metal. She scrambled for the truck. Chloe was right behind her. They yanked the doors open, piling inside as Liam threw himself into the back seat. Maya jammed the key into the ignition, her hands shaking so violently it took 3 tries. The engine roared to life just as the entity reached the driver's side door. It didn't try to smash the window. It just stood there, its hand resting gently on the glass. Its blank, empty eyes staring directly into hers. With a final choked sob, Maya slammed the truck into reverse and hit the gas, leaving the thing that wore her friend's face standing alone in the growing light of dawn. Maya, Liam, and Chloe escaped in the car, leaving a cloud of dust and gravel in their wake. The first few minutes were a blur of raw, animalistic panic. Maya drove with her foot pressed to the floor, the engine screaming as the truck bounced violently over the rutted dirt track. The only sounds in the cab were Chloe's ragged sobs, Liam's harsh, ragged breathing, and the frantic pounding of Maya's own heart. She didn't look in the rearview mirror. She didn't dare. She just drove, her eyes fixed on the path ahead, on the promise of a paved road and a sane world. After what felt like an eternity, the tires hit asphalt. The smooth, steady hum of the road was a stark contrast to the chaos of the forest. The drive became silent, filled with a shared shock and trauma so profound that no words could touch it. Maya glanced at Liam and Chloe in the mirror. Their faces were pale, their eyes staring blankly, seeing nothing. They were 3 survivors adrift in a small metal lifeboat, having just escaped an ocean of impossible horror. There were no questions, no explanations. No attempts to make sense of what had happened. The truth was too monstrous to be spoken aloud. They had survived, but a part of their small, happy world had been brutally amputated. They had lost their friend. As the miles stretched on, Maya's mind had to perform a terrible, necessary act of separation. She had to take her memory of Ben, the real Ben, the one who laughed too loud and always remembered her birthday and stole fries from her plate and place it in a box. She had to lock that box and keep it safe from the memory of the other thing, the cold, calculating mimic with empty eyes that had worn his face. The thing in the woods wasn't Ben possessed or Ben changed. It was a replacement. And that meant the Ben she knew, her Ben, had walked into those woods and had simply ceased to exist. He was truly gone, consumed by the woods. Hours later, the sun was high in the sky. The forest was just a dark, distant line on the horizon. Maya saw a sign for a scenic overlook and, on an impulse she didn't understand, she pulled the truck over. She got out, the solid ground beneath her feet feeling strange and unreliable. Liam and Chloe remained in the car, lost in their own silent worlds. The final scene was just Maya, standing at a wooden railing, looking back at the dark tree line miles away. She knew with a certainty that settled in her bones that a part of her would be trapped there with him forever. The girl who had arrived at that campsite, full of easy laughter and simple friendship, had vanished in those woods just as surely as Ben had. What was left was a survivor, a witness to an impossible truth. She had escaped, but she would never be free. The story ends here, on a silent highway, with 3 survivors forever bound by a shared, unspeakable trauma, and a 4th friend lost forever to the woods. Our tale leaves us not with answers, but with a chilling, uncomfortable question about the nature of trust and the terrifying fragility of identity. How well do you truly know the people closest to you? You think you know them by their face, their voice, the intimate tapestry of shared memories that proves they are who they say they are. But what is the person underneath all of that? What if the soul you think you know is just a performance, a collection of habits and histories that can be perfectly studied, flawlessly cataloged, and then perfectly replicated by something else? Something cold, ancient, and hungry. In that final terrifying moment, what would you have done? Who would you trust when your own eyes and your own heart deceive you? Share your thoughts in the comment section below. I read every single one. If this tale of a friendship corrupted left a chill down your spine, the greatest way to support the channel is to hit the like button and to subscribe to Horror Stories Audio. Ring the notification bell, and you'll never miss our weekly descent into madness. Until next time, look closely at the faces of the ones you love. Trust your instincts. And always be careful when they wander off alone. The person who comes back might not be the one who left. Sleep well.